The town of Millridge, Pennsylvania sits tucked between rolling hills and dense woodlands, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where doors stay unlocked, and where the worst crime in living memory was a stolen tractor back in 1974. The population, 3,216. At least that was the count in the spring of 1987, before 12 children disappeared without a trace, and before the entire nation learned that some places, no matter how quiet, harbor secrets too dark to comprehend. April 23, 1987. Thursday. The sky hung low and gray over Millridge Elementary School as the final bell rang at 3:15 in the afternoon. Children poured from the double doors, their voices echoing across the parking lot, backpacks bouncing against small shoulders. It was an ordinary day. Unremarkable, forgettable, even. But what happened in the hours that followed would burn itself into the collective memory of an entire generation. Bus number 17 sat idling near the curb, its yellow paint faded and chipped, exhaust curling into the cool spring air. The driver, a 42-year-old man named Dale Humphrey, sat behind the wheel, waiting. Dale had been driving that route for 6 years. He was reliable, quiet, well-liked by parents and staff alike. He kept a thermos of coffee on the dashboard and always waved to the crossing guard, a woman named Edith who had worked that corner for nearly 2 decades. The 12 children who boarded bus 17 that afternoon ranged in age from 6 to 11. Their names would soon be repeated on television screens across the country, printed on missing person flyers, whispered in prayers. Tommy Gaines, age 9, freckled and gap-toothed, obsessed with baseball cards. Katie Mercer, age 7, who wanted to be a veterinarian. The brothers Ethan and Lucas Brennan, ages 10 and 8, inseparable since birth. Melissa Ford, age 11, who played violin and dreamed of performing at Carnegie Hall someday. The list goes on. 12 children, 12 families, 12 lives about to vanish into the void. At 3:22, according to school records and witness statements, bus 17 pulled away from Millridge Elementary and headed west on Parkview Road. The route was simple, predictable, 23 minutes from start to finish on most days. 5 stops. 12 children. Home by 3:45, just in time for afternoon cartoons and homework. But bus 17 never completed its route that day. At 3:57, a woman named Gloria Patterson called the school office, her voice tight with concern. Her daughter, Katie Mercer, should have been home by now. The secretary assured her that the bus had left on time, that perhaps there was traffic, that everything was fine. But Gloria Patterson was not reassured. She knew her daughter. Katie was never late. Not once in 3 years of taking that bus. By 4:15, 3 more parents had called. By 4:30, panic began to ripple through the phone lines. At 4:42, the school principal, a man named George Whitmore, contacted the transportation office. The dispatcher tried to radio Dale Humphrey. No response. They tried again. Static. Silence. The dispatcher's hand trembled as she reached for the phone to call the police. Millridge had a small police force. 4 officers. 1 chief. They were used to handling noise complaints, petty theft, the occasional domestic dispute. But when Chief Raymond Keller received the call at 4:51 that afternoon, he knew immediately that this was different. A school bus missing, 12 children unaccounted for, a driver who was not responding to radio contact. But Keller grabbed his jacket and keys, his stomach already twisting into knots. And the search began within minutes. Officers drove the route, eyes scanning roadsides, driveways, parking lots. Nothing, no sign of the bus. No skid marks, no abandoned vehicle. At 5:33, a county-wide alert went out. By 6 o'clock, state police had joined the search. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors thumping against the darkening sky. Volunteers gathered at the fire station, organizing search parties, printing flyers, calling neighbors. The parents of the missing children huddled together in the school cafeteria, their faces pale, their voices raw from crying and calling out names into the growing darkness. And still, no sign of bus 17. By nightfall, the story had broken on local news. By morning, it was national. Reporters descended on Millridge like a swarm, their cameras and microphones turning a small town's nightmare into primetime entertainment. The families begged for privacy, for answers, for anything. But there was nothing. No leads, no witnesses, no bus, no children, just silence. The investigation intensified. FBI agents arrived on April 25th, setting up a command center in the town hall. They interviewed everyone. Teachers, parents, staff members, students who had been on other buses that day. They combed through Dale Humphrey's background, searching for anything, any hint of motive or malice. But Dale was clean. No criminal record, no suspicious behavior, no history of violence or mental illness. He was a widower, lived alone in a modest house on the edge of town, kept to himself but was always polite. Neighbors described him as kind, dependable, unremarkable. The theories began to surface, each more horrifying than the last. Kidnapping, human trafficking, a random act of violence. Some whispered about cults, about rituals, about things too terrible to say aloud. But theories without evidence are just stories, and the FBI needed facts. On April 27th, 4 days after the disappearance, a farmer named Hank Lowell was checking fence lines on his property, about 14 miles west of Millridge, when he noticed something strange. Tire tracks, deep and wide, cutting through a field near the tree line. Hank followed them, his boots crunching through the dry grass, and that is when he saw it. Bus 17. Hidden beneath a dense canopy of trees barely visible from the road. Hank ran back to his truck, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the radio. Within 20 minutes, the field was swarming with law enforcement. Officers surrounded the bus, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. But there was no response, no movement, no sound, no sound. But true, they opened the door. The bus was empty. No children, no driver, no backpacks, no jackets, no shoes, nothing. Just rows of empty seats, silent and still. The keys were in the ignition, turned to the off position. The gas tank was half full. The emergency exit at the back was closed, undamaged. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken windows, no fingerprints other than those belonging to Dale Humphrey and the children who rode that bus regularly. It was as if 12 children and their driver had simply evaporated. Forensic teams scoured the bus for hours, bagging evidence, dusting for prints, searching for anything that might explain what had happened. But the more they searched, the less sense it made. The seats showed no signs of distress. The floor was clean. There were no fibers, no hairs, no trace evidence that suggested anyone had been forcibly removed. The bus had been driven to that field, parked beneath the trees and abandoned. But by whom? And why? And where were the children? Searchers fanned out across the surrounding woods, calling names, checking every hollow, every ravine, every inch of terrain. Dogs were brought in, trained to track scent. They circled the bus, sniffing, whining, but picked up nothing. It was as if the children had never been there at all. Days turned into weeks. The media coverage grew more intense, more invasive. Tabloids ran wild with speculation. Psychics called the tip line, claiming visions, offering theories. Conspiracy theorists flooded the airwaves with accusations and paranoia. But the FBI continued to work methodically, following every lead, no matter how slim. On May 3rd, 10 days after the disappearance, a hiker discovered a child's shoe near a creek bed, approximately 2 miles from where the bus had been found. It was small, worn, a pink sneaker with a frayed lace. The sole was caked with mud. It was identified as belonging to Katie Mercer, and the discovery sent a fresh wave of hope and terror through the families. If Katie had been there, perhaps the others had too. Search teams converged on the area, combing through the woods with renewed urgency. But they found nothing else. No other shoes, no clothing, no bodies, just that single sneaker lying in the dirt like a cruel breadcrumb. Forensic analysis of the shoe revealed trace amounts of soil consistent with the area where it was found, but also something else. Microscopic fibers, synthetic, industrial, the kind used in carpet manufacturing, or upholstery, or vehicle interiors. The lab techs ran tests, trying to match the fibers to a specific source, but the results were inconclusive. It could have come from anywhere. Weeks became months. Summer arrived, hot and suffocating. The search parties dwindled. The media moved on to other stories. But the families of the missing children did not move on. They could not. Every day was a fresh wound, every night a waking nightmare. They held vigils, posted flyers, appeared on talk shows, begging for information, for closure, for anything. And then, in late June, Dale Humphrey's body was discovered. A kayaker spotted something floating near the bank of the Monongahela River, about 30 miles south of Millridge. At first he thought it was a log, tangled in the roots of a fallen tree. But as he paddled closer, he realized it was a body. Bloated, decomposed, barely recognizable as human. Dental records confirmed the identity. Dale Humphrey, cause of death, drowning. But the autopsy revealed something disturbing. Bruising around the wrists and ankles, consistent with restraints, marks on the neck, faint but unmistakable, suggesting strangulation or choking. The medical examiner could not say with certainty whether Dale had been alive when he entered the water, but the evidence suggested he had been subdued, possibly tortured, and leaned before his death. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. If Dale had been killed, then who had driven the bus to that field? Who had taken the children? And why? The investigators dug deeper into Dale's life, searching for connections, for enemies, for any reason someone might target him. They found nothing. No debts, no grudges, no secret life hidden beneath the surface. Dale Humphrey was, by all accounts, an ordinary man who had been caught up in something extraordinary and horrifying. The case grew cold. Tips slowed to a trickle. The FBI scaled back its presence in Millridge, redirecting resources to other investigations. The families were left to grieve, to wonder, to live with the unbearable weight of not knowing. Years passed. A decade. 2. The children who had disappeared would have been adults by now, in their 20s, their 30s, and the parents aged, their faces etched with sorrow and exhaustion. Some moved away, unable to bear the memories. Others stayed, clinging to the faint hope that someday, somehow, they would learn the truth. And then, in the spring of 2024, 37 years after the disappearance, a construction crew breaking ground for a new housing development 15 miles outside Millridge made a discovery that would rip open old wounds and force the world to confront a nightmare it had tried to forget. They were excavating the foundation for a new subdivision, tearing down an old, abandoned warehouse that had sat empty for decades. The building had once belonged to a textile company that went bankrupt in the early 1980s. It had been boarded up, forgotten, left to rot. But as the bulldozers tore through the concrete, something caught the attention of one of the workers. A metal door, half buried beneath rubble, leading down into a basement. The crew supervisor called the authorities. Something about the door felt wrong. Heavy, reinforced, locked from the outside. Police arrived within the hour. They pried the door open, shining flashlights down into the darkness. A narrow staircase descended into the earth, the air below thick and stale. Officers descended slowly, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. At the bottom of the stairs they found a room. Concrete walls, no windows. A single overhead bulb long dead. And scattered across the floor, covered in dust and decay, were 12 small backpacks. Each one bore a name tag. Tommy Gaines, Katie Mercer, Ethan Brennan, Lucas Brennan, Melissa Ford. All 12 children. All 12 names. The officers stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. After 37 years, the children had been found, or at least evidence of them had. The backpacks were collected, catalogued, sent to the FBI lab for analysis. Inside, investigators found schoolwork, pencils, crayons, notes passed between friends, all frozen in time, relics of a day that should have been ordinary. But the children themselves were not there. The room was empty, save for the backpacks and a few other items. On a folding chair, a rusted chain bolted to the wall, and scratched into the concrete, faint but unmistakable, were words. Small, childlike handwriting. "Help us. Please. We are scared." The discovery sent shockwaves through the nation, and the case was officially reopened. New investigators were assigned. Forensic teams descended on the site, searching for DNA, for fingerprints, for anything that might identify who had held those children captive and where they might be now. But as the investigation unfolded, one chilling detail emerged. The warehouse had been owned, prior to its bankruptcy, by a man named Victor Halloway, a businessman, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. Victor Halloway had died in 1991, just 4 years after the disappearance, in a car accident on a remote mountain road. His death had been ruled accidental. But now, investigators began to wonder, had it really been an accident? Or had someone silenced him before he could talk? The FBI began digging into Victor Halloway's past, searching for connections to Dale Humphrey, to Millridge, to anything that might explain why he would kidnap 12 children. And what they found would change everything. Victor Halloway was not the man Millridge thought he was. On the surface, his life had been a portrait of success and respectability. Born in 1943 to a working-class family in Pittsburgh, Victor had built himself from nothing, establishing Halloway Textiles in 1968 and growing it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise by the late 1970s. He donated to schools, sponsored little league teams, sat on the board of 3 different charities. When he died in that car accident in 1991, the local newspaper ran a full-page obituary celebrating his contributions to the community. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, Victor Halloway had been living a double life. FBI investigators, digging through decades-old financial records and property documents in the summer of 2024, discovered that Victor had owned not just the warehouse where the backpacks were found, but 17 other properties scattered across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. Storage facilities, abandoned factories, remote cabins, all purchased under shell companies, all hidden from public view. And in every single one of those properties, investigators found evidence of something deeply disturbing. Reinforced rooms, soundproofed walls, locks on the outside of doors. And in 3 of the locations they found remains. The first discovery came in early July, at a property near the Ohio border. A small farmhouse set back from the road, surrounded by overgrown fields. The investigators had obtained warrants to search all of Victor's former properties, and when they entered the farmhouse basement, they found bones. Small bones, child-sized. Forensic anthropologists were called in, and the painstaking work of identification began. By late August, DNA testing had confirmed the identities of 4 of the missing children: Tommy Gaines, Melissa Ford, Ethan Brennan, Lucas Brennan, all found in shallow graves beneath the farmhouse floor. The cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition, but the evidence suggested they had been held captive for some time before they died. Weeks, maybe months. The nation reeled. The families who had held on to hope for 37 years were finally given answers. But those answers brought no peace, only pain, only rage, only the terrible knowledge that their children had suffered, had been afraid, had called out for help that never came. But 8 children were still missing. Katie Mercer. 6 others whose names had been etched into the national consciousness. Where were they? Were they buried somewhere else? Were they still alive, hidden in some dark corner of the world? The FBI pressed forward, searching the remaining properties with renewed urgency. In September, investigators searched a storage facility outside Wheeling, West Virginia. It was a nondescript building, one of those places where people keep old furniture and Christmas decorations. But in Unit 47, registered to one of Victor's shell companies, they found something that made even seasoned agents pause. Photographs, hundreds of them. Polaroids, faded and yellowed with age. Images of children. Not the 12 from Millridge, but others. Different faces. Different years. The photos were dated, scrawled on the back in Victor's handwriting. 1979. 1981. 1983. 1985. Some of the children were smiling, posed stiffly as if being told to cooperate. Others looked terrified, their eyes wide, their faces streaked with tears. The FBI cross-referenced the faces with missing persons databases going back decades, and what they found was staggering. At least 23 children, vanished between 1976 and 1987, could be linked to Victor Halloway's sphere of influence. Different towns, different states, but all within a 100-mile radius of his various properties. All unsolved cases. All forgotten by everyone except the families who still mourned. Victor Halloway had not been an opportunistic predator. He had been systematic, methodical, patient. He had built an empire of suffering, hidden in plain sight, shielded by wealth and reputation. But the question remained, had he acted alone? Investigators began to scrutinize Victor's associates, his business partners, his employees. They interviewed everyone who had worked at Halloway Textiles, everyone who had known him, everyone who might have seen or heard something. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. There had been others. In October 2024, a woman named Diane Pritchard, 71 years old, walked into the FBI field office in Pittsburgh and asked to speak to someone about the Millridge case. She was nervous, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn manila envelope. The agent who met with her listened as Diane explained that she had worked as a secretary at Halloway Textiles from 1984 to 1989. She had kept quiet for decades, too afraid to speak, too uncertain of what she had seen. But now, with the truth spilling out, she could not stay silent any longer. Diane opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. It showed Victor Halloway standing beside another man, both of them smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. The photo had been taken at a company picnic in 1986. But it was not Victor who caught the agent's attention. It was the other man, Dale Humphrey. Dale Humphrey. The agent leaned forward, heart racing. Diane explained that Dale had worked part-time at the warehouse, doing maintenance and custodial work, in addition to his job as a bus driver. She had seen him there many times, always with Victor, always talking in low voices, always stopping their conversations when someone approached. She had thought it was odd at the time, but had dismissed it. People had private conversations. It was not her business. But then, in April 1987, when the children disappeared and Dale's face was plastered across every television screen in the country, Diane had felt a chill of recognition. She had wanted to come forward then, but fear had stopped her. What if she was wrong? What if she got involved in something dangerous? What if no one believed her, so she had stayed silent? And the silence had eaten at her for 37 years. The FBI verified Diane's story. Employment records confirmed that Dale Humphrey had worked at the warehouse, paid in cash, no formal contract. It had been a side job, unreported, invisible to investigators who had scrutinized his life in 1987. And now the pieces were falling into place. Dale had not been a victim, he had been an accomplice. The theory went like this: Victor Halloway had recruited Dale, perhaps offering money, perhaps appealing to some dark impulse Dale kept hidden. Together they had planned the abduction. Dale would drive the bus off route, take the children to the warehouse. Victor would be waiting. They would transfer the children to another vehicle, dispose of the bus, and vanish. But something had gone wrong. Perhaps Dale had panicked. Perhaps he had wanted out. Perhaps he had threatened to confess. And so Victor had killed him, dumping his body in the river, silencing him permanently. But if that was true, then what had happened to the children? Investigators returned to the warehouse where the backpacks had been found, searching with new eyes, new technology. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in, scanning the property for anomalies, for disturbed soil, for anything that might indicate a burial site. And in late October they found something. The section of the basement floor, beneath layers of concrete poured decades ago, showed signs of disturbance. The team carefully drilled through the concrete, breaking it apart piece by piece. But there, beneath the foundation, they found a second room. A hidden chamber, sealed off, forgotten. The room was small, barely 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were concrete, the floor dirt, and scattered across that dirt floor were bones. So many bones. Mengs and forensic teams worked around the clock, cataloging every fragment, every piece. DNA testing began immediately, and over the following weeks the results came back. Katie Mercer. 3 others from the Millridge 12, but also remains belonging to children who had vanished years earlier. 1979, 1981, 1984. Children whose names had been lost to time, whose families had never stopped searching. By December 2024, the count stood at 19 confirmed victims. 19 children taken, held, killed and buried in Victor Halloway's hidden tomb. But 4 of the Millridge 12 were still unaccounted for. This 4 names. 4 families still waiting. The FBI expanded the search, using every tool at their disposal. Cadaver dogs, sonar equipment, satellite imagery. They scoured every property Victor had ever owned, every place he had ever visited. And in January 2025, at a remote cabin in the woods of West Virginia, they found the final piece of the puzzle. The cabin was barely standing, the roof sagging, the walls rotting. But in the cellar, investigators found a metal box, rusted and corroded, buried beneath the floorboards. Inside were documents, records, a journal handwritten in Victor's meticulous script. The journal was a confession, a detailed account of everything Victor had done, dating back to 1976. He described each abduction, each child, each moment of suffering he had inflicted. He wrote about his partnership with Dale, about how they had met, about how Dale had been hesitant at first, but had eventually embraced the darkness. He wrote about the day of the Millridge abduction, about how perfectly it had gone, about how the children had been so trusting, so easy to control, and he wrote about what happened after. According to the journal, the children had been held in the warehouse for 3 days. Victor had intended to keep them longer, to savor the experience, but Dale had grown increasingly unstable, talking about confessing, about making things right. On the 3rd night, Victor had made a decision. He could not risk Dale's weakness. He could not risk exposure. So he had killed the children one by one, while Dale watched, paralyzed by horror and guilt. And then he had killed Dale too, or tried to. But Dale had fought back, had escaped, had run. Victor had hunted him down, had beaten him, had thrown him into the river to drown. And then Victor had returned to the warehouse, had sealed the bodies in the hidden chamber, had poured concrete over the evidence, and had walked away. But the journal revealed one final, chilling detail. 4 of the children, Victor wrote, had been taken elsewhere before he killed the others. He had sold them, traded them to contacts he had made through underground networks, people who paid for children, who wanted them for reasons Victor did not ask about and did not care to know. The FBI immediately launched an investigation into those contacts, those networks. But the trail was decades old, scattered across international borders, buried beneath layers of false identities and dead ends. Some of the people Victor had dealt with were dead. Others had vanished. Maitje vanished till then. And the 4 children, if they were still alive, would be in their 40s now, possibly living under different names, possibly unaware of their true identities. The search continues. Even now, in 2025, investigators are following leads, chasing ghosts, hoping against hope that somewhere out there, those 4 children survived, that they can be found, that they can be brought home. But for the families of the 12 who boarded Bus 17 on April 23, 1987, there is no happy ending. Only the terrible knowledge of what their children endured. Only the long-delayed funerals, the burials, the gravestones that should never have been necessary. Millridge has never recovered. The town is smaller now, quieter, haunted by memories it cannot escape. The elementary school where those 12 children once laughed and played was torn down in 2003, replaced by a memorial park. Every April 23rd, families gather there, lighting candles, reading names, refusing to let the world forget. And across the nation, the case has become a grim reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a friendly face, a respectable reputation, a carefully constructed lie. Victor Halloway was not a monster from a nightmare. He was a businessman, a neighbor, a man who shook hands and smiled and gave to charity while building a dungeon in the shadows. The FBI continues to investigate, continues to search for the 4 who remain missing. They follow every tip, every whisper, every faint possibility. Because somewhere out there, maybe, just maybe, those children are still alive, still waiting, still hoping that someone will find them. But as the years stretch on, as the case files grow thicker and the leads grow colder, one question haunts everyone who has touched this investigation, and everyone who has looked into the abyss of what Victor Halloway created. How many others were there? How many children, across how many years, across how many hidden rooms and unmarked graves, suffered and died at the hands of men like Victor Halloway and Dale Humphrey? How many cases, still unsolved, still cold, still filed away in dusty cabinets, are connected to a network of predators that law enforcement is only beginning to understand? The Millridge 12 were not the beginning. They were not the end. They were simply the ones we found. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying truth of all. In February 2025, the FBI released a statement confirming that the investigation remains active. They have identified 17 additional properties with potential connections to Victor Halloway, locations that have not yet been searched. They have uncovered financial transactions linking him to at least 6 other individuals, people who may have participated in his crimes, people who may still be alive, and to people who may still be hunting. The families of the victims have filed lawsuits against Victor Halloway's estate, seeking justice, seeking accountability, seeking something to fill the void that can never truly be filled. The estate was worth nearly $8 million at the time of Victor's death. Every penny will go to the families. But no amount of money can bring back a child. No settlement can erase 37 years of not knowing. Millridge, Pennsylvania, population now 2,411, will forever be known as the town where 12 children vanished, where a school bus became a hearse, where trust was shattered and innocence was stolen. And somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of possibility and terror, 4 people who were once children may be living lives they do not remember, and carrying names that are not their own, haunted by fragments of memories they cannot quite grasp. Or perhaps they are not alive at all. But perhaps they, too, rest in unmarked graves, waiting to be found. The world has moved on. New crimes, new horrors, new headlines. But for those who lived through the nightmare of April 23, 1987, for those who lost children, siblings, friends, the world stopped turning that day. And it has never started again. The investigation will continue. The searches will continue. The hope, however faint, will continue. Because to stop searching would be to abandon those 4 children, wherever they are, whoever they have become. And that is something the families, the investigators, the nation cannot do. The case of the Millridge 12 is not closed. It may never be closed, because some mysteries do not have endings. Some nightmares do not fade. Some doors once opened can never be shut. And the question that lingers, the question that will haunt everyone who knows this story, is simple and terrible. What else is buried out there, waiting to be found?